What's going on, you guys? Back here today filming the transformation part 2, the second part of how to mod your PowerMac G5 to fit ATX hardware. And where we left off last time was we have our motherboard standoffs glued into the case and everything else removed. So what we're going to start with today is how to get it to the point where you need it to be to paint. So that involves taking off this door and cutting the hole in the door, cutting out the I/O that we already drew the lines off of, and disassembling the case entirely between this top part and the side that wraps all the way around. And basically what we're going to need for all that is, for the door, we need our center punch, hammer, and a way to mark where we're going to drill our holes, a drill bits, a screwdriver to take off the existing mounting hardware, and this saw to cut out our window. And then once we're all done cutting out the window, we're going to move to this rotary tool, and this is what we're going to use to cut out the lines we already drew in the back of the case for the I/O. And then last but not least, we go into the disassembly process where we need this Torx T8 driver and this pair of pliers to get everything off the case and ready for paint. So without saying any more, let's get onto the door. All right, so starting off with our tape measure and our Sharpie, we're going to look at the inside of the door first. And our window is going to go right here in this space here. So what we need to do is measure in 3/4 of an inch from this door mount on all sides. So that way we have our points of where our corners are going to be so we can drill our holes. So going from the outside of the door, this is at 1.5 inches to the inside of this track. So we're going to add a 3/4 of an inch. And that puts us at 2 1/4. My Sharpie is about to die, but that's okay. And we're going to draw a couple of these points on each side. So next we have, looks like 3 1/8. So adding 3/4 is 3 7/8. Come to this side, 3 7/8. So next thing we have to do is take off this frame, and that's 18 screws all the way around, and they are just Phillips heads, so grab your screwdriver and start unscrewing. So once we have all these screws out, we're going to lift this off, and inside here there's 3 of these little plastic inserts, and you need to make sure to hold on to these because these are all integral in how the door goes onto the case. So put those in your pile of keep stuff with the screws. Using the frame for the door, we're going to use the inside edge on this side to connect all of our lines, so that way we can figure out where to mark our corners for drilling the holes. So place it on the 2 Sharpie lines you drew, push down firmly, and draw a nice Sharpie line across. And do that for all 4 of your lines, all 4 of your sides, and make sure you go past where the next one's going to intersect it. Okay, so we have our step bit right here, and since the biggest hole in the step bit is 3/4 of an inch diameter, we're going to use 3/8 of an inch, which is half of that distance, in from the corners of our intersection points to mark where we're going to start drilling our holes. This way the outside of this hole is going to line up with the lines on our case. So our next tools we're going to need are the center punch and the hammer. And what we're going to do with these is, using this center punch, it's got a nice sharp little point on the end. On our spots where we drew our intersection points, we'll put that right there, and then we'll just tap the end of it with the hammer, and that way we have a nice little spot for our drill bit to start, so it won't walk around on us when we try to start drilling the hole. So we brought the door out to the garage to drill the holes and do the cutting because I didn't want aluminum all over my floor. So we're going to use some just quick little dirty C-clamps to come down here and clamp it to my makeshift workbench, which is a piece of plywood, and we're going to start drilling the holes. All right, so now that our holes are drilled, we need to flip this over because if we try to cut on this side, our saw is gonna hit all these little standoffs. So flipping it over, and we're gonna grab our straight edge and just draw lines between the edges of the holes. So line it up on both sides and draw your straight line. So now that we've got our lines drawn, we're gonna take our saw and start with putting the blade inside the hole, and then we're just gonna cut along this line between these two holes. Okay, so one thing to note, if you guys aren't planning on painting your case, you need to lay some painter's tape down along the outside of where you're gonna cut, because the vibrations of the saw really chew up the sides of this aluminum that are still gonna be on there. Okay, so this is the part where we're gonna cut out the I/O for the motherboard. We drew the lines on there in the last video, and due to the close proximity to the side and the flimsiness of the back of this, we're just gonna use a rotary tool instead of that saw. So now that this is cut out, we're gonna go back upstairs in the air conditioning and take the case apart for paint. All right, so the next things we're gonna take out is the power button front I/O shroud and the CD drive shroud. And basically you just pry off the metal housing on the power button shroud, and then there's a couple of screws under there that you're gonna unscrew with a Phillips head screwdriver. And then moving on to the CD drive, it's just prying out some tabs and basically forcing it until you get it out. There's no clean way to really do it. Next thing, we're gonna grab our T8 screwdriver and go around the outside edges of all of this on this side, and then along the top two edges on this side, removing all of these screws. Now, with this computer being 15 years old, you're gonna get some screws that are pretty easy, like this one, and some that you're not gonna be able to unscrew at all by hand. So that's when you grab a pair of pliers and grab onto your T8 screwdriver and just crank it until it pops loose, and then you can unscrew it all the way. So repeat that process for every single one of these screws. So once you have all the screws out around the bottom and across the top and the bottom on the inside here, basically these are just gonna lift their way off. So it's a slow process, but you just pry your fingers along the edge until they all pop out, and then this top part is loose. You're gonna do the same thing for the bottom. So this one's a little bit tighter because there's more overlap, but once you get it started, it should pop its way off, just like the top. And then you can pull these apart, and this whole case will just pull its way out from in between. And again, this is something you're gonna wanna be extra careful with. So obviously, if you guys aren't gonna paint this case, the disassembly process is not as important. But now that we're here, everything's taken apart, all the insides are completely out, all the cuts are made, we are ready to go with paint. All right, well that about wraps us up, you guys. Everything's disassembled and ready for paint. Look forward to the next segment of this series where we're going to take this from an old crappy Mac and finally make it into the PC master race machine that it could have always been. So if you want to check out the first video of the series, click over here. If you want to check out some other random video from my channel, click over here. If you want to subscribe, it would be super helpful. Click right here. Watch me grow. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Like this video, and like I said, subscribe to my channel. Also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is going to be right up here. So I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.